Story 1. The Last Ride at Midnight. I'd always hated elevators, but working the night shift as a janitor in a 20-story office building didn't give me much of a choice. I needed the job, and the pay wasn't bad, so I tried to ignore the pit in my stomach every time I stepped into one of those steel boxes. It was just after midnight, and I was dragging my mop bucket toward the service elevator when the overhead lights flickered. It wasn't unusual. The building was old, and I'd gotten used to little quirks like that, lights flickering, the hum of the air conditioning cutting in and out, and even the occasional sound of footsteps when I knew I was the only one there. It creeped me out sometimes, sure, but I always told myself it was just my imagination. That night felt different, though. The air in the hallway was colder than usual, and there was this faint, metallic smell I couldn't place. I shook it off, chalking it up to the industrial cleaning supplies I'd been using. The service elevator was at the far end of the hall, and as I approached, I noticed the down button was already lit up. Strange. I hadn't seen anyone else in the building all night. Still, I figured maybe someone had left it pressed earlier and forgot about it. I stepped inside, my mop bucket sloshing as I pulled it in behind me and pressed the button for the basement. The door slid shut with a faint squeal, and the elevator began its descent. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself, when the elevator suddenly jolted to a stop. The lights flickered again, and for a moment, everything went pitch black. Great, I muttered, stabbing at the buttons. None of them lit up. I pressed the emergency button, but it didn't seem to be doing anything either. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. That was when I noticed something odd. The floor indicator on the panel didn't make sense. Instead of numbers, it was just a blank, glowing red screen. The elevator shuddered, and a low groan echoed through the shaft, like the entire structure was straining under some unseen weight. I felt my stomach tighten as the metallic smell grew stronger, mingling with something else, something foul and rotting. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and tried to stay calm. Okay, I said to myself, my voice trembling a little. It's just a mechanical issue. Maintenance will figure it out. The elevator lurched again, but this time, instead of going down, it started to ascend. Slowly, almost painfully. I wasn't pressing any buttons, and the panel still wasn't displaying numbers. I could feel the floor vibrating beneath my feet, and every so often, there was this faint scraping sound, like something was brushing against the sides of the elevator shaft. I tried to tell myself it was just cables shifting or something, but it didn't sound mechanical. It sounded deliberate. Finally, the elevator came to a stop, and the doors slid open with a soft chime. The panel still didn't show a floor number, but I peeked out cautiously, dragging my mop bucket behind me. The hallway beyond was dark, darker than it should have been. The emergency lights that usually stayed on after hours weren't working, and the only illumination came from the dim, flickering glow of the elevator. The hallway didn't look right, either. The carpet was damp, and there were stains spreading out in irregular shapes, almost like water damage. The walls, which were normally a clean, sterile white, were streaked with dark, rusty smears. I told myself it was probably just rust or mold, but deep down, I knew better. It smelled wrong, like iron and decay. I was about to step back into the elevator when I heard it, a faint whisper. It was so quiet at first that I thought I was imagining it, but then it came again, clearer this time. It sounded like my name. Jake. I froze. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight into the hallway, but there was nothing there, just the empty corridor stretching into darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" No answer, just silence. I was about to retreat into the elevator and slam the closed door button when I saw movement at the far end of the hallway. At first, it was just a shadow, quick and fleeting, like someone ducking out of sight. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing, but the light from my phone barely penetrated the darkness. Then it moved again, stepping into the faint glow of the elevator's light. It was a figure, but not a person, not really. It was tall and thin, its limbs too long and its joints bent at unnatural angles. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its frame, and its head tilted to one side, as if it was studying me. Its face, or what passed for a face, was blank, except for a wide, jagged grin that looked like it had been carved into its flesh. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was stare as it started to walk toward me, its footsteps wet and squelching against the damp carpet. The smell of rot hit me like a punch to the gut, and I gagged, stumbling backward into the elevator. The thing's grin widened as it picked up speed, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. I slammed the close door button over and over, praying for the doors to shut before it reached me. For a moment, I thought they wouldn't, that the elevator would betray me, but at the last second, the doors slid shut with a metallic clang. The elevator began to move again, this time descending rapidly. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped my phone, and it clattered to the floor, the screen shattering. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I saw it again standing in the corner of the elevator, its head tilted and its grin impossibly wide. I don't remember much after that. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in the lobby, sprawled out on the cold tile floor. The morning sun was streaming through the glass doors, and 2 security guards were standing over me, looking concerned. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" one of them asked, helping me to my feet. "We found you passed out in the elevator." I looked around, disoriented. The elevator. It stopped working. There was something in there with me. I stammered. The guards exchanged a look. "We checked the cameras," the other one said. "The elevator didn't stop all night. You were in there alone the whole time." I quit that job the same day. I told myself it was just stress or a bad dream, but deep down, I knew the truth. I still can't ride elevators without feeling like something's watching me, and sometimes, late at night, I hear faint whispers in the back of my mind. The worst part? That smell, the metallic, rotting stench, it's never really gone away. Story 2. Trapped between floors. I was running late for my interview at the law firm on the 27th floor. The building was one of those sleek glass towers downtown, modern, cold, and way too expensive for anything but corporate offices. The lobby smelled like fresh coffee and industrial-grade air freshener, and the marble floors were polished so perfectly that they reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. I stepped into the elevator with 3 other people, a woman in a red coat, a man in a suit, and a delivery guy pushing a cart of sandwiches. We all nodded politely, the way strangers do in elevators, and avoided eye contact. I hit the button for the 27th floor, and the rest of them pressed theirs. The woman was heading to 23, the man to 20, and the delivery guy didn't press anything. I assumed he was going higher than me. The elevator doors slid shut with a smooth ding, and we started moving. Everything felt normal at first. The soft hum of the elevator motor, the faint smell of whatever sandwiches the delivery guy was carrying, and the occasional creak of the cables as we ascended. I glanced at my phone, checking the time. 9:27 a.m. I had 3 minutes to make it to my interview. Perfect. Then the elevator jolted violently, throwing all of us off balance. The lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. "What the hell?" the man in the suit muttered, his voice sharp and irritated. I could hear him pressing buttons on the panel, but nothing happened. The floor indicator above the doors was dead, and the emergency button didn't seem to be doing anything. "Is this normal?" the woman asked nervously, her voice trembling. "Does this happen a lot?" "No," the delivery guy replied, his voice calm but tense. "I've been to this building 100 times. This elevator's usually fine." I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the panel. "Maybe it's a power outage," I offered, trying to sound reassuring. "We're probably stuck until maintenance fixes it." The light from my phone illuminated the tight space, casting long shadows against the steel walls. The woman in the red coat looked pale, clutching her purse tightly. The man in the suit was still jabbing at the buttons, his movements growing more frantic. The delivery guy stood quietly in the corner, his cart of sandwiches blocking part of the door. "Can anyone call for help?" the woman asked. "No signal," the man grunted, holding up his phone. I checked mine too, and sure enough, no bars. It didn't make sense. We were downtown, surrounded by cell towers. Even in an elevator, we should have had something. The air was starting to feel warm and stale, and I could smell the faint tang of sweat mixing with the sandwiches. The woman fanned herself with her hand, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "It's fine," I said, more for myself than anyone else. "They'll notice the elevator isn't working and send someone to fix it." The delivery guy gave me a skeptical look but didn't say anything. Minutes passed, maybe 10, maybe 20, I couldn't tell. The heat was getting worse, and the silence was oppressive. Nobody wanted to talk anymore, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the elevator cables. Then, faintly, I heard a soft scratching noise. At first, I thought it was coming from inside the elevator. I looked around, shining my flashlight at the corners of the ceiling and floor. Nothing. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it was coming from outside the elevator. "What is that?" the woman whispered. Her voice was barely audible. "I don't know," I said, straining to listen. The scratching grew into a scraping sound, like nails dragging against metal. The man in the suit stepped back from the panel, his face pale. That's not normal," he stammered. The delivery guy moved closer to the doors, pressing his ear against the seam. "There's something out there," he said quietly. "No," I replied, my voice firm. "It's just the cables, or the building settling. It's nothing." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The scraping stopped abruptly, replaced by a deep, resonant bang that echoed through the elevator shaft. The woman screamed, clutching the man's arm, and he didn't push her away. I shined my flashlight at the doors, but they didn't budge. The air felt heavier now, almost suffocating, and the smell of sweat and sandwiches was overwhelmed by something else, something sharp and metallic, like blood. The delivery guy stepped back from the doors, shaking his head. "I don't think we're alone," he said. His voice was calm, but his hands were trembling. "What the hell does that mean?" the man snapped. He was trying to sound angry, but I could hear the fear in his voice. Then the lights flickered back on, dim and flickering. The floor indicator above the doors lit up again, but instead of numbers, it displayed strange, glowing symbols, jagged lines and curves that didn't look like any language I'd ever seen. The elevator shuddered and began to move again, but it wasn't ascending or descending, it felt like it was going sideways. The panel beeped, and the elevator stopped abruptly. The door slid open, revealing a hallway bathed in sickly yellow light. The walls were cracked and stained, and the carpet was shredded in places, exposing the concrete beneath. The air smelled damp and earthy, like a basement, but we were supposed to be somewhere above the 20th floor. "Where are we?" the woman whispered. The delivery guy stepped forward cautiously, peering into the hallway. "This isn't part of the building," he said. "I've been here 100 times. This shouldn't be here." The man in the suit looked at me. "Do we stay here, or—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes wide and fixed on something behind me. I turned, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. At the far end of the hallway, something was crawling toward us. It was pale and emaciated, its skin mottled with dark bruises. Its limbs were impossibly long, bending at unnatural angles, and its head was tilted to one side, dragging against the floor. I couldn't see its face, not clearly, but I could tell it was looking at us. Watching. The woman screamed again, and the delivery guy grabbed her arm, pulling her back into the elevator. The man in the suit slammed his fist against the panel, hitting the buttons over and over. The thing at the end of the hallway was getting closer, its movements jerky and broken, but it was faster than it should have been. The door started to close, but the thing was already inches away, its hands reaching for the seam of the doors. I saw its face for the first time, a twisted, hollow mask of flesh, with empty sockets where its eyes should have been. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. The doors slammed shut just as its fingers brushed against the delivery guy's shoulder. The elevator began moving again, this time ascending rapidly. None of us said a word. The woman was sobbing quietly. The delivery guy was clutching his cart so hard his knuckles were white, and the man in the suit was staring at the doors, his face pale and blank. When the doors finally opened, we were back in the lobby. The sunlight streaming through the glass felt surreal, like we'd stepped into a different world. The receptionist looked up from her desk, smiling. "Everything okay?" she asked cheerfully. I wanted to tell her what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. The delivery guy pushed his cart out without saying a word, and the woman and the man in the suit followed. I stood there for a moment, staring at the elevator, half expecting the doors to open again and reveal that hallway, or worse, that thing. I skipped my interview and left the building. Weeks later, I looked it up online, trying to find out if anyone else had experienced something strange there. All I found were vague rumors, stories of people getting trapped in the elevators and hearing noises, but nothing concrete. I still can't ride elevators without feeling like I'm being watched, and sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I see that hallway. I see its cracked walls and shredded carpet, and I hear the sound of something crawling toward me. Story 3. The Maintenance Shaft. I was the new guy on the maintenance team at the Greenfield Mall, and it was my first overnight shift. Most of the other guys had warned me about how boring it was, just endless hours of walking around the empty mall, fixing minor issues, and making sure nothing was out of place. But boring wasn't the word I'd use for it. Being in a place that big, alone, after hours, felt wrong. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of air conditioning or the distant creak of the building settling. Even the smell was different at night, less like popcorn and perfume, more like dust and damp concrete. Still, I needed the job. Bills were piling up, and I was lucky to have found anything at all after months of unemployment. My supervisor, Dale, wasn't exactly a warm guy, but he seemed to know the ropes. He handed me a flashlight and a walkie-talkie when I clocked in at 10 p.m., and gave me a rundown of my tasks for the night. "Check the freight elevator," he said, his voice gruff. "It's been acting up all week. Maintenance looked at it earlier, but it's still giving us issues. Stops randomly between floors, sometimes doesn't open. Just take a look, make sure there's no debris or anything blocking the doors." I nodded, though the idea of wandering into the dark basement alone didn't exactly thrill me. Dale didn't seem to notice or care about my hesitation. He just waved me off and went back to his paperwork. The freight elevator was in the farthest corner of the basement, past rows of storage rooms and utility closets. The basement always gave me the creeps. The air down there felt heavier, colder, like it was pressing in on me, and the smell metallic and musty, like wet iron, was worse than usual that night. I told myself it was just my imagination. First day jitters. When I finally reached the freight elevator, I noticed the doors were slightly ajar. Not enough to see inside, but enough to make me pause. I stepped closer, my boots echoing on the concrete floor, and hit the open door button. The doors creaked open slowly, revealing the elevator's interior. It was empty, but something about it felt off. The floor was streaked with dark stains, probably grease or oil, I told myself, and there was a faint, acrid smell, like burnt rubber. I stepped inside, shining my flashlight around, and checked the corners. No debris, no trash, nothing obvious that would be causing the issues Dale mentioned. I decided to test it. I hit the button for the first floor, and the elevator shuddered to life, groaning as it began to ascend. The overhead light flickered erratically, casting shifting shadows on the walls. The ride was smooth at first, but just as it passed the basement level, the elevator jolted to a stop. The lights went out completely, leaving me in total darkness. "Great," I muttered, fumbling for the flashlight. I clicked it on and hit the buttons on the panel. None of them responded. Even the emergency button was dead. The air inside the elevator felt wrong, stale and heavy, like it was being sucked out slowly. I could hear faint noises coming from the shaft, scraping sounds, like metal brushing against metal, and something else. A distant, rhythmic tapping, almost like footsteps. I leaned closer to the doors, pressing my ear against the seam. The tapping grew louder, closer, and then stopped abruptly. The silence was worse than the sound. I hit the buttons again, harder this time, but the elevator didn't move. "Dale, you there?" I said into the walkie-talkie, my voice shaking. Static crackled in response, but no reply came. I tried again. "Dale?" The elevator's stuck. Something's wrong. Nothing. Suddenly, the elevator dropped about half a floor, jerking violently before stopping again. My flashlight fell from my hand, clattering to the floor and rolling into the corner. As I bent down to grab it, I heard the unmistakable sound of laughter, faint, childlike, and echoing from somewhere outside the elevator. I froze, my hand hovering over the flashlight. The laughter grew louder, more distinct, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. It wasn't the kind of laughter you'd hear on a playground or at a birthday party. It was hollow and broken, like someone mimicking the sound without understanding what joy felt like. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it at the doors, half expecting to see something standing there, but the metal panels were smooth and unbroken. I stepped back, pressing my back against the wall, trying to keep the beam steady. The laughter stopped suddenly, replaced by a faint scratching noise. The elevator shook again, and the overhead light flickered back on for a split second. That's when I saw it. There were handprints smeared across the walls, small, childlike handprints made of something dark and wet. They hadn't been there when I stepped inside, I was sure of it. I stared at them, my chest tightening, and then the scratching noise came again, louder this time. The door slid open without warning, revealing a dark, unfinished floor. It didn't make sense. The basement was the lowest level of the mall, and there were no sub-basements or storage areas below it. But here it was, a long, narrow hallway with cracked concrete walls and exposed pipes dripping water onto the floor. The air was freezing, and the smell of rot was overpowering. I stepped out cautiously, shining my flashlight down the hallway. The laughter returned, faint but unmistakable, and I saw movement at the far end. Shadows, small and quick, darting out of sight. I told myself it was just rats, but deep down, I knew better. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing down the corridor. "Is someone there?" No reply, just laughter. I thought about turning back, hitting the close door button and waiting for the elevator to start working again, but something compelled me to move forward. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was something else entirely. As I walked, the flashlight flickered, and I felt the temperature drop even further. The handprints weren't just on the elevator, they were on the walls now, smeared in chaotic patterns that made my stomach churn. I reached a bend in the hallway and froze. They were there, a group of children, pale and gaunt, their hollow eyes fixed on me. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like marionettes controlled by invisible strings. Their mouths stretched open into silent screams, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. One of them stepped forward, its bare feet slapping against the wet floor. It tilted its head, watching me, and then it began to run. I turned and bolted, my flashlight swinging wildly as I sprinted back to the elevator. The laughter was deafening now, echoing around me, and I could hear their footsteps wet and frantic chasing me. I reached the elevator and slammed the button, praying the doors would close in time. The children were just feet away when the doors slid shut, cutting off their screams. The elevator jolted to life, ascending rapidly, and I collapsed against the wall, gasping for air. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the flashlight again, and the beam illuminated the ceiling. There was a face staring down at me, pale, hollow-eyed, and grinning. I don't remember getting out of the elevator. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the mall's main corridor, the fluorescent lights blindingly bright. Dale was there, his face pale and his walkie-talkie in hand. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. I just walked past him, out the front doors, and into the cold night air. I quit the next day and never set foot in that mall again. But the thing is, it didn't end there. Every time I ride an elevator now, I swear I can hear faint laughter echoing through the shaft. And sometimes, when the doors open, I see small, pale handprints smeared on the walls.